Trump has a mini-me and now he runs MAGA. All opinion articles are the opinion of the author and not necessarily of American military news. If you are interested in submitting an op-ed, please email protected, blank. Time equals 400 ms, greater than there's a reason why we're drawn to rebels. The mavericks that are so independent they follow their own path. Those who do what they think is right regardless of whatever consequences they may face. Those who think that if something is worth fighting for, it has to be done, devil be damned. Shawn Wylde, the founder of the Trump-approved, official Trump fan club MAGA.com, is a Marine veteran whose story eerily mirrors that of Donald J. Trump. Call it the universe's sense of humor or several twists of fate bunched together, but the similarities between the experiences and tribulations of the billionaire of Fifth Avenue, New York, and his biggest fan are noteworthy. Time equals 400 ms, greater than MAGA. Before MAGA, Wylde has always admired the Donald. In our conversations, the MAGA.com pioneer recalled how, as a child, he looked up to Trump as a childhood hero, so much so that he wrote the real estate mogul several letters. Wylde even won a Patriotic Essay Contest back then by writing about Trump and how he was the perfect example of the American dream, and how his life helped convey the American brand globally. Wylde was MAGA before MAGA was a thing. Life would not be easy for Wylde. As you would read below, the former Marine would be linked to controversies related to hazing, accused of inciting an insurrection, and screwed 7 ways to Sunday by the government bureaucracy. Wylde would also be a serial entrepreneur like the man he always looked up to, and he would make his own millions. That's far behind Trump's billions, of course, but Wylde states that he's perfectly okay with being number 2. Time equals 400 ms, greater than. It's almost funny how fake news was a thing before the Donald turned it mainstream. Wylde knows this firsthand, as he battled the same thing while fighting for his fellow cadets at the Virginia Military Institute, VMI. During his tenure as the president of the school's student-run honor court, Wylde, who went as Shawn Joyce back then, found himself fighting against the administration after they severely punished several students for allegedly hazing a freshman. He helped lead a "step off," a school-wide demonstration, to protest the suspension and dismissal of several seniors who were accused of hazing their underclassmen. Wylde wasn't accused of anything himself, but he stepped in to help those he felt were unfairly treated. They punished cadet leaders because their subordinates supposedly hazed a freshman. They weren't even accused of being around it or aware of it. It was stupid, and I can't stand stupid people in positions of authority. We found out later the hazing never even occurred. They revoked or reduced all the punishments, but still kicked me out for embarrassing them. Wylde said. The 6-day standoff between the VMI students and the administration would end with officials agreeing to reduce the penalties given to several students. They also reinstated 2 students who were dismissed. The school administration decided to make Wylde pay for his actions, however. Just a couple of weeks later, a disciplinary panel voted to dismiss Wylde for inciting an insurrection against authority. Alumni, students, and parents were aghast, but Wylde would ultimately leave the school without graduating. See the video documentary on Shawn Wylde's military school, Insurrection. Time equals 400 ms, greater than. We all know how Trump was accused of inciting an insurrection, and the left has ensured that the branding stuck. Like Wylde, all Trump really did was give a speech, and people rose up in defense of him. Trump is still being punished for this today, as he continues to get accused of leading an insurrection, even if the notion is completely false. It's also not talked about a lot, but Trump has been connected to a hazing controversy in his youth. Despite the narrative that the fake news media has fostered, Trump actually did well in a military setting. Donald was sent to the New York Military Academy by his dad, Fred, when he was 13 years old. At the time, Trump was a mischievous young man who had a tendency to test people. The academy, known for being a strict institution that whips young men into shape, was a perfect fit for the young Donald. Trump would climb up the ranks of the academy until he was named captain of a company during his senior year. The young Trump delegated tasks to his subordinates, and it did not take long before his officers were accused of hazing a freshman. Trump was connected to the controversy, but was later given a promotion to a staff position. Trump's tenure at military school ended better than Wylde's, But it's interesting how the Donald and his #1 fan could relate to each other when it comes to hazing and insurrection accusations. Wylde, essentially, stood up and sacrificed himself for students just like Trump, who got mired in an unfair hazing accusation. Screwed retroactively in his book Think Big, Donald Trump recalled how he was invincible in the 1980s. He was the real estate industry's maverick, the mogul with the Midas touch. Then by 1991, Trump's world was collapsing. He owed insane amounts of money, and his real estate peers were throwing in the towel. Haters would say that the Donald's tribulations at this time happened because he was incompetent, but as Trump explained in his book, he was actually screwed over by something that's not only incredibly unfair but was also completely out of his control. Time equals 400 ms. greater than after the Tax Reform Act of 1986. The value of many real estate investments took a nosedive, thanks in no small part to the fact that its effects were retroactive. The changes in the tax law contributed to the savings and loan crisis, as well as the real estate crash in the late 80s and early 90s. Trump himself tasted dirt several times during this period, with his businesses declaring bankruptcy multiple times. Fortunately, bankruptcy does not define a man, and it definitely did not define the Donald. Furthermore, a business bankruptcy reorganization can be used as a tool to one's advantage. It is not the same as a personal bankruptcy, which the fake news tried to make it seem. I was in a horrific period. I had been the hottest guy in the 80s. Then almost overnight, I went from being a super genius to a moron. It was a pretty hard blow, but I realized that I was not the moron that the media was making me out to be. I was the same person. I still had what it takes to be great. I never forgot that. In truth, I simply got caught like many others when the market crashed. In all fairness, the government changed the tax laws in real estate and made those changes apply to buildings that were purchased years earlier when the tax code was different. It was unfair, Trump said in his book. You may think these experiences would not be experienced by Trump's #1 fan, but you'd be wrong. Just like how accusations of insurrections are common between the two, both Trump and his mini-me were screwed by retroactive rules from the bureaucratic elite. When the Obama-Biden-era Budget Control Act was signed into law in August 2011, servicemen like Wylde were told to bend over and not complain. One of the nastiest changes that the BCA brought was a bonkers interpretation of what the military called plead. When Marines are called to active duty, they are entitled to pay, travel, housing, and station allowances. A reservist would receive these entitlements based on where they permanently lived, commonly known as plead. Prior to Obama, a reservist's pled was their permanent address. Under his administration, they changed the rule to claw back money from service members. Pled then became the place where the reservist was at when the orders were signed. It was, to put it simply, a very minor change to a bureaucratic technicality. Time equals 400 ms. greater than, but for our military warriors, this small bureaucratic change turned into a financial nightmare. With the new plead interpretation in place, the amount of pay that servicemen were entitled to immediately decreased by a wide margin. To make matters worse, the new plead interpretation was also retroactive, which meant that overnight, servicemen were saddled with mountains of debt. Wylde himself was not initially included, but he stepped in to help his brothers in arms who were treated unfairly. After he requested MAST, the Marine Corps version of becoming a whistleblower, he was targeted for retaliation and received a debt of over $100,000 overnight because of the change. Wylde would spend the next years battling this unfair debt, and he would learn through years of legal battles and a stint in prison just how powerful the bureaucracy really is. It also taught him that standing by your virtues requires a long hike up a mountain of pain. Once again, just like his idol Donald Trump, Wylde got screwed by ridiculously unfair bureaucratic rules that were implemented retroactively. Prosecutorial misconduct. Wylde's stint in prison was caused by a downward spiral brought about by head injuries he received from his time as a Marine. While incarcerated, Wylde figured out that he could never get a regular job with his record. So he thought hard about it and came up with a solution. He'd be a businessman himself. It was also at this time when Wylde was inspired once more by the man he looked up to all those years past. Wylde had actually lost track of Trump as he got older and as life got more complicated. But one day in federal prison, he saw Donald J. Trump coming down the escalator. The Marine, beaten, battered, financially drained, and worn, didn't give up. I got busy in life when I became an adult and lost track of Trump. But when I saw him come down that escalator, I was in jail because of Obama's corrupt DOJ, I literally started tearing up. Because I knew America was back. And I knew I was back. I owed Trump my life. I was still relatively positive. After being betrayed by the country, I almost lost my life serving, and I was pretty bummed. But I knew we were back. I was inspired and started to think how I would build myself back up after I got out. It all came to me very quickly. I started sketching out art and products I would sell, Wylde said. For some reason, Wylde was sent to a maximum security prison in Baltimore, Maryland for a minor financial crime and was released on December 5, 2015, where he would be placed on house arrest for an extra year. He would be issued an honorable discharge, fully ending his commission in the Marine Corps, while he was still in prison. This, of course, is unheard of. The military doesn't give honorable discharges to convicted felons. But the Marine officer who visited him in prison apologized for what happened and said Marine leadership felt bad but that their hands were tied. The Marines Corps refused to prosecute Wylde, but Obama's corrupt DOJ decided to anyway. To make matters worse, one of the federal charges Wylde was convicted of isn't even an actual crime. If this sounds insane, just compare it to what is happening to Trump. Now they share the same pain of being criminally charged with non-crimes. So why MAGA.com? Wylde was not kidding when he said he is Trump's #1 fan. Being a serial entrepreneur like his idol, Wylde admits that he got rich essentially selling merch about President Donald. Thus, it was only fair that Trump was owed half of what Wylde earned. So Wylde paid Trump half of what he earned on merchandise he sold using Trump's name and image. He didn't know how to reach him, so he kept paying into various meet and greets and sponsored an event for the president until he paid him his half of the profits. Trump met his mini-me several times, and he loved Wylde's illustrations. This is why MAGA.com is Trump approved. Trump loves the patriotic illustrations that poke fun at the insanity of the left. Trump agreed to partner with MAGA.com, but after he announced his candidacy, campaign finance rules derailed the plan. Donald Trump, after all, knows the value of hard work. Trump's dad was brilliant, but Trump is a genius. His dad was a millionaire, but Trump made billions. It's just as hard, probably harder, to go from being a millionaire to a billionaire than it is to go from broke to a millionaire. Both are insanely hard. Wylde said. MAGA.com is breaking out now, but it has been several years in the making. Wylde had planned on meeting Trump and establishing MAGA.com after the Donald was re-elected U.S. president in 2020. COVID would come, however, and the left ultimately cheated their way in. Yes, critics can argue that not all cheating is considered fraud in a court of law, and they'd be right, but cheating is still cheating, and nothing will ever change that. So this 2024, with the Donald running for president once more and with the left more determined than ever to derail the Trump train, even a fan club like MAGA.com can do much good. For Wylde, there's a lot at stake. In 2024, Trump has to win. Otherwise, America as we know it could be over. If Trump does not win in 2024, the country as we know it is over. And that is not hyperbole. I don't even like politics, and I'm not a Republican. This is our new reality. Freedom of speech is on the ballot. The justice system is on the ballot. Everything is. If he wins, he saves the world. If he loses, we get fucked by the psycho-modern left and the corrupt bureaucracy. That said, I'm obviously MAGA and a Trumplican. I cannot stand most politicians. I think they are low-talent losers who are too ugly to make it in Hollywood yet still want the limelight. And it's so phony. That's why I never really went public as the guy behind all the famous Trump art and memes that were going viral. But I was always supporting Trump. Plus I had to make money first to get back into the fight more publicly. Wylde said, "There's a bit over a year before the next presidential elections happen. That's more than enough time to make sure that Donald J. Trump's message is broadcast loud and wide. Time equals 400 ms. Greater than. He is the biggest star of all time, and I mean that. In all of human history, there has never been a bigger star than Donald J. Trump. And so, I was always annoyed that he didn't have a fan club. So I bought MAGA.com and decided to turn it into a fan club. I met with him to offer him half of it, but all these middlemen get involved and screwed things up. Then his team said he couldn't do it because he announced that he's running for president. So when he's done being president, he can have it. No strings attached. I never asked him for anything. But of course, everything I do on MAGA.com is to support him. Wylde also teased some exciting projects that his fellow Trumplicans can expect to see in the coming months. While a picture speaks 1,000 words, art memes that I created during his first run speak 1,000,000, and meme songs I'm making will speak 1,000,000,000. I've been working on professionally recorded and produced songs since the day they stole the 2020 election from him. Be on the lookout for some amazing music to really represent Trump and the MAGA movement, Wylde declared.